Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It is 6:45. Have a nice crowd here. Glad you all made it up to the third floor. I'd forgotten how to get up here or where even the elevator was, but it worked out. So good to see you. Second straight meeting now, but I've got a specific logo or background for the slide for the autumn. How's that? So I only have it for the first slide though. Thank you. All right, so I know there are probably some new people here tonight. I hope so. And I wanted to tell the people who haven't been here before about our show and tell and our raffle that we have at the end of the meeting. The show and tell are products that people in the guild have made. They usually put them on this table over here. And when we get to it, it's about at the end of the meeting, just before the actual presentation. We let them show what they have done and so on, and tell us a little bit about it. Then we'll have a raffle, and the raffle today is a little bit bigger than it usually is. In fact, I may get this wrong, Joe. So I think there are two $50 tickets to Rockler. Gift cards, I'm sorry. There are two beautiful saws from Quinn Saw. There are two caps that are Festool 3, also donated from Quinn Saw. Is that it? I got them all. So I think there have been more sales tonight of raffle tickets because of that. So that's good. So when we get to that, that'll be towards the end. That'll be right after the show and tell and just before the presentation then. So are there any new members or visitors in the audience tonight? And if so, we'd like you to stand up. Bob Castigar there has a microphone, so we'd like you to give us your name. Tell us just a little bit about yourself or so and how you heard about us and so on, or maybe you're just visiting and so on. So go ahead.
My name's Mark Davidson. I recently retired and I live across the street from Foss Park, so the shop's very convenient. And Dick Sawyer, who's one of my neighbors, has recently joined and took me over and showed me the shop, so that's why I wanted to join as well to get more involved in woodworking.
Welcome. So,
thank you.
So I live about an hour away from the shop, so it's
Good evening, I'm Walter Bilgram, recently retired from BJC. My father passed away earlier this year, and I got all of his hand tools. And he was a cabinet maker and did a lot of segmented turning. He learned his trade in Germany and was in the union and part of the St. Louis woodworking scene for like 60 years. So now I'm retired, trying to figure out how to sharpen a plane and how not to hurt myself.
You're in the right place. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Porter. I moved from Nashville, Tennessee about 6 months ago and joined the guild. Just wanted to learn how to build furniture with hand tools, so, yep.
Wait a minute, Bob. Before Sarah sits down, I already had it later in the program. In fact, I even have a slide about it. But Sarah already, even though she's a pretty darn new member of the club, has already met the or answered the volunteer request for an assistant librarian for Al, and that's Sarah. So, thank you. Anybody else? New? Okay. So, upcoming classes and presentations, Bill, and I think do I do it? Okay, I can click here, so. Okay, Bill?
That would be better. There is no there's no meeting in December. Is that better? Yeah. There's no meeting in December, so the next meeting and presentation is Keith Lassant is going to talk about hand-powered scroll saw and other hand tools. Next slide. Classes in December. There's a beginner's class on December 2nd that has a limit of 8 people, and that class is full. The current fundamentals class is meeting for the 8th session on the 10th. Next slide. Got a bunch of classes scheduled in January. There's a sharpening class and using a card scraper. That's 2 separate classes, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. First time, well, actually the second time we've done that. It worked out fine the first time. There are a couple of, well, the 10th class of the current fundamentals, 23, is January 6th. The 14th is the first class of next year's fundamentals class, followed 2 weeks later by the second class. There is now I'm confused. January 22nd is a sharpening class, and I thought that was on January 6th. I'll send out an email on that. It's not both the 6th and the 22nd. The 22nd is a beginning scroll saw class. And next slide. February, we have a joinery class, another fundamentals class of the next session, actually two of those. Next slide. What I've done is essentially scheduled all the classes for the rest of the year. There are a couple of openings that aren't squared away yet for November and December a year from now. But these are the topics that are scheduled. We're going to have a class on building drawers. We're going to have another beginner scroll saw class. We're going to have a spray finishing class that's going to be at the shop. We're going to have a class on making through and half-blind dovetails, one-day class. Another beginner's woodworking class that'll happen prior to the summer session of fundamentals. Going to have a class on making mortise and tenon joints. We're going to have a class on building small boxes. We're going to have a class that's called Introduction to Carving. There's another cutting board class. We're going to have a class on bending wood. I hope you can do it better than I can. Have a class on inlay. And have a class on oil and shellac finishing put on with a rag or a brush or whatever. And we're going to have another class on tuning up and using hand planes. That class was just offered last month, so it'll be a repeat. If there are any classes that aren't on that list that you would like to see, send me an email and tell me what you'd like us to teach. I'm hopeful that we can squeeze in some more classes where we've got a half-day class now. We can try and squeeze in another half-day class the other half of the day. So, and Mike Sistek volunteered here this evening that he might be interested in teaching a class in federal inlay and decoration, and we're going to try and squeeze that in at the end of the year. I think that's it.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Bill. As you can see, we offer lots of classes, and there are a lot coming up early in the year. But to remind you, there is no meeting next month in December. So in January, we'll get back rolling hot and heavy then. Okay, so toy program itself, Rich Weitzman.
It's on? Okay. I went ahead and packaged toys for 3 of the hospitals today. And we've got a table full of toys back here. And when you bring the toys, would you please put a tag with your name and how many toys? There's 1 or 2 boxes every so often that someone doesn't do that. So please, either that or make sure you put it on the list.
Okay. Rich, for those who haven't been here very long, tell me the total number of toys we've donated to hospitals. It's like 85,000 or something like that.
I didn't bring that with me.
But it's in that neighborhood.
It's in that neighborhood.
It's a lot of toys. So.
And there were more than that prior. Since the guild started, we've been making toys originally just for the Marine Corps. And we did, I think in the beginning years, about 5,000 toys.
Wow.
Just those. And that was not just from the members. Woodsmith collected a lot of toys for us in those days. And we had people that were not members that shipped toys to us in those days for the Marine Corps. So, and we used to have a Christmas party, and that's when we delivered them to the Marines in those days.
I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again tonight. As far as I know, Rich is the only charter member of the Guild, 1984.
A little before that.
Okay.
A little before that, in the back room at the wooden shop, there were about 8 of us that met, and we're the ones that started the club.
So any questions about history, look up Rich. So.
Hope his memory's better than mine. Let me jump back on classes. One that I didn't have on a slide. Ron Bonce has agreed to teach a class in making a mallet. He's going to do it in his shop. It's not scheduled yet, so it doesn't interfere with open shop time or anything. And we're trying to get arranged on when that might happen in January.
Having the stuff put into the wood. What do you call it?
No, I think he'll already have that
Okay.
resin in the wood.
All right. Wayne Humphrey, I saw him here. There he is. The Christmas toy program.
We've delivered so far some 800 toys. About 600 of those went out this past week, and hopefully next week we'll get 700 and something out to Toys for Tots and wrap it up for the year.
They're beautiful, though. Thank you. I don't know if he wants to say anything or not, but I want us to continue to advertise and promote our Superstar Weekend, which is coming up in March 8th and 9th, 2024 to be exact. Logan Whitmer is the current chief editor of Popular Woodworking. So he has agreed to come and be our superstar this year. So we look forward to that. Dan, you need to say anything else? Welcome to.
Yeah, what's holding up registration is I don't have the contract yet for the venue, but we're going to try to get the venue here at the Moolah Shrine Center, similar to what we did last year. But a big change from last year, I want to say it's free to everyone. The guild has picked up the cost, but I was told I can't say free. So it's $30, and that includes lunch and refreshments. So it's very affordable for you to attend. Logan is a Sawyer, gifted woodworker, and he's going to show both the hybrid method of using power tools, but he's going to bring his assortment of hand tools too. So he said, make sure we have a sturdy workbench for him. But it's for the all skill level. You know, his presentation is going to be for all skill levels. So, you know, I'm going to encourage everyone to attend. Yes. Well, on the 9th, the board meets with Logan, excuse me, on the 8th. So on the 9th is when all of you are invited to the workshop. Thank you for asking.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Who said that? I didn't hear what somebody said.
You want to know what month?
Oh, March. Yeah, I think that was up there then. Okay, Joe Turner identified some issues that might be appropriate for us in the next month or two or so. Joe is our treasurer, and we have become aware. Mark Spagnola has made available. We were thinking about him for our superstar, but he lives in the area now. He has a gigantic double drum sander that he has hardly used, like a few times over the course of the year. It's beautiful. It's way more powerful and way better and nicer than the one we have. Double drum. It weighs over 400 pounds. It has a little bigger floor space needed, but maybe not that much to take up. We're thinking about buying it at a very reasonable price, about $2,500 versus the about $4,000 for a new one. I think Dan looked it up and so on. There it is. I'm going to let him talk about it and so on, and then Dan and I can answer any questions you might have about this particular item regarding whether we should go ahead and do that or not. So, thanks.
Right. Back one chart. All right, so the reason, just a real quick summary, the reason I'm up here is I want to talk about a budget change request, and the question might be why. And the reason for it is whenever the budget expenses might exceed the approved budget expenses that we had last April, that we all approved, by more than 10%, a new approval by the guild membership is needed. And so all you guys in attendance have to approve that. So the two items that might cause us to go over our current budget, go ahead, next chart. Jay was kind of alluding to them. The first one is a drum sander, $2,500, normally $4,000. Like new, the person who bought it doesn't need it, and so we're considering buying that. And as a side note, the one we have, we would then consider selling, and we'd get revenue from that, but that's separate from expenses. The second item, a little intriguing, we put in the budget $4,000 for the Superstar Weekend, but that was for April's Superstar Weekend. So the next Superstar Weekend, which we thought would be next April, would have been the next fiscal year. Didn't have to worry about it. But now that it's in March, it's in our fiscal year. So suddenly we realized, oh, we got to account for that. Estimate $3,500. You know, it's a good guess. So the total of those two is $6,000. Next chart. Currently, our estimated expenses are $29,000, so another $6,000 gives us about 20% increase, well over the 10%, and that's why we got to talk to you guys. Now, the new budget, we just not only have an increase in our expenses, but it just so happens we have an increase in our revenue, and of course, both of these are our best guess, but because of the commissioned work that Bill's coordinated, as well as sponsorships that Todd's working, we're seeing that our potential for revenue is higher as well. The delta that we had projected prior was about 8,000. Currently, we project about 6,000, but Todd just told me about another sponsorship, so already that delta is increasing. So that's the end result. We'll still be on the positive if we do these two things. You might say to yourself, well, what if we vote no? Well, then we wouldn't get the drum sander right now until we knew that we could stay within budget, and we'd have to figure out how to spend less so we can make sure we got the Superstar Weekend in. So just so you know, if you say no, that's what we'd have to do. If you say yes, then we'll progress as planned. All right, so I just wanted to educate. I think the rest might be up to Jay. So
I want to point out.
Sorry, by the way, did anybody have any questions about the drum sander? Because that's Dan. Here you go, Dan.
Yes.
As far as the drum sander goes, I would suggest that you not sell the one that we have already. That way
There's two different grits that go into the double drum, by the way.
I understand that, it's a step down. But right now, the current single drum is a pain in the butt to change the paper. And if you're sanding at 100 grit on the double drum, you probably jump from 100 to 150 or 180. And a lot of people will sand down to 220 or 230. So if you have two sanders, you can save that aggravation of changing the grit.
Good input, and this will all be, I think, contingent on David, who manages the shop out there, finding the room. This, no, good input, and this plan is not contingent on selling it. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Any other questions about the sander itself? Not the budget issue, but. It is. Dan, he asked about, it's a Supermax.
It is a Supermax. It's called a 25X2 because it has two drums, it has two posts. It has a 5 horsepower electric engine on it, so it's a beast.
So it doesn't have an open end. Both ends are closed, just one pass through. I have a double drum sander, which, excuse me, 25 inches. Mine is, I thought was huge. It's 20 inches, so, you know. Any other questions? I'd like to point out that at the beginning of this fiscal year, and we were talking about the budget, there was in the budget $5,000 or $4,500, if I remember right, for replacing the saw stop. We decided that we didn't need to do that. I clearly remember, but it's not in there, I thought that we decided to put $5,000 in the budget just to have there to replace a machine that broke all of a sudden or whatever, just so we would have it in the budget. Then we wouldn't be having this discussion because the $5,000 is more than $2,500 and so on. I'm just throwing that in. And we are going to end up having, it's not going to be a problem to the guild financially, as he's already done, to, what do we want to call it, ignore? Just to approve this modification, a budget, yeah, you had a name, but change the budget. Hold your hand up if you're willing to do that. I think that's pretty darn unanimous. Joe, you got it. we did what we needed to do. Oh, there's Sarah. I told you, that's my reminder. I have a couple other things that have just come up tonight that I need to make as announcements, I guess. Probably most of you saw as you were coming in tonight, I don't know if you even knew that we were going to a different place or not, but if you kind of look to where our normal meeting place is, there were lots of Christmas trees and so on in there. It's called the Festival of Trees, and Ryan, happened to run into some of the people that are in there, and they said that they would be very happy, not only happy, but desirous of any of you that want to, at the end of the meeting, to stop by there and just kind of look around. It's beautiful, and I think, Wayne, do we have a few things down there that we have turned in for the festival?
Yeah, they haven't been set in place yet.
Okay, but anyway, we're quite welcome, is the point, though. I said in my president's letter that I couldn't mention a couple things because we hadn't had our board meeting because it didn't work out with the Zoom issue that night. But I can tell you that the financial audit was finalized for 6 months, and so we're done with that. We will have, it's not in place yet, and it's going to be in the website, a policy for returning members who have let their memberships lapse for various periods of time, and then they decide to come back. Somewhere, Bill, was it in the classes, instructions or whatever, the policy about take the safety class over? Somewhere. I can tell you that this policy that we've been telling people was not in the bylaws, and it was not in the website. So anyway, there's been a policy that if your membership lapsed for any time, actually, that you would have to not only pay dues again if you wanted to come back, but you would have to take the safety class again and therefore pay the other $20. Somebody brought that up to us, and we decided that that was kind of silly. Plus, it's not even in writing any place that we knew of to begin with. The new policy will be, if your membership lapses, then you decide to renew, then you can do so with no penalty for the first year. Your new renewal date will be the date that you sign up the second time. Okay, so if you come in and pay your dues and it's been only 10 days, your new renewal date will be at that date, and so on. And if it has been more than a year, we decided probably it has been kind of a long time. Don't know whether you've done a single piece of woodworking during that time, and maybe it would be wise for you to go ahead and take the safety class again, and that will be the policy, that you will have to do it if it's been more than a year then. I haven't even asked the board about this. But we're having, our first commissioned job that we took and so on didn't go as smoothly as we would like. But on the other hand, it brought us in $3,000 or so. We haven't got the money yet, but it's a good money maker. So if we were going to continue with that, we already have 2 other people who have approached us with jobs that probably would be in that category. I think that I'm going to propose that we have a new committee, and it will be called the Committee for Commissioned Projects, and it will have a chairperson, and they will be a member of the advisory board. I'm just throwing this out. I haven't even talked about it to the board or not. They'll be a member of the advisory board, invited to our meetings and so on. That person and their committee, and hopefully they'll get a whole lot of people on that committee who are just volunteering to be worker bees. They're volunteering to be somebody that, depending on a project, if we decide that we might be able to accept it, we want to know that we have the manpower to go ahead and do that project, whatever it ends up being. So there'll be maybe a whole bunch of people that are on the committee, the worker bees and so on. And anyway, so that's how we can handle it in the future. Again, I haven't passed it by the board. This person will be the head honcho. They will come to the board with a request and so on, and after they've researched it and so on, to have us decide whether or not the board wants to accept it as a project or not. Again, maybe I was out of place to mention it without having gone to the board first, but that was only 2 days ago that we had our meeting, though. Okay, and then just tonight, our first sponsor, You Pick Hardwoods, which is Craig Noren. We have and just tonight, I think people from Quinn Saw have decided maybe, or they're going to look into. It's not finalized or not, but they already gave us a check for $500. So. So this sponsorship program that we've been looking into for quite some time now, we're just now getting to the point of it coming to fruition and having some things good for the guild happen because of it. So thank you all that have been involved. I might mention that I didn't know that there was even a bookkeeper for I don't need to do that, do I, Dan? Okay. I didn't know Dan has been so many things, but he's also the bookkeeper for the toy program. I didn't even know that. So, but there's another person who's been willing to step forward to do that in the future then. Okay, I think we're ready now to move. So we're ready for show and tell. Those of you who have submitted items for show and tell, please come up. And if that page, yes. You surely can. Give me the paper. So get a microphone.
We're coming up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
While you guys are setting up, we'll come up. Where do you want me?
I will.
So my name is Vicki Berry, and I am past president of the Guild. To my left is Wayne Humphrey, who's worn many hats, but he is a past president. And Tom Tierney is our past treasurer. So, not that we have exceeded our best if used by date, but we've been asked to be the nominating committee for our upcoming new board. And I hope you've seen our Help Wanted ad in the newsletter the last couple of months. And Sarah, thank you so very much for not only being a new member, but willing to step forward and help Al, because every time he lugs all those books out, I think, oh my gosh, that poor guy needs help. So thank you for coming to his rescue. Anyway, I wanted to make us available to you. Should you have any questions, have any interest, please don't run away if I bored you, which some of you may have. Anyway, we do have an open position in the president's position. We could not convince Jay to accept the nominee again, so that is an open position that we have. As you know, Jay's done a great job this year, and we are sorry to see him go, but we are looking for someone, preferably who has had some board experience, to raise their hand to be a candidate for that position.
Younger, somebody younger.
It's just a number. It's just a number. And then another position we have is vice president. Bill Shucott wants to step down as the formal VP and do more of just teaching, which he does a great job at. So we have that position open. Then we have one director position open. That is the position that Bob Castiger is filling when Jay elevated up to president. So those are those positions are known vacancies, but as an FYI, even the treasurer and secretary can be open positions if someone would like to, has an interest. If more than one person raises their hand, we get to have an actual vote. But we really haven't had that opportunity in 5-10 years, I don't know. It's been a long time. So sadly, it has been difficult for members to step forward and step up. But I can assure you the positions aren't near as time-consuming or demanding as you may envision. The board collectively works together, and it doesn't seem like any one person has to do everything. Poor Bill, I will say poor Bill, who has stepped forward too many times and done some tasks that I wish we had been able to delegate to others. So I think we're going to work hard next fiscal year to do just that, to take some of the tasks that he stepped up to just reallocate that load. But we usually have been meeting since COVID via Zoom. So it's a virtual meeting. I think we had hoped to meet at least once in person this year. Yes. I'm supposed to remind you that it doesn't start till April of next year. But we vote in April at the April meeting, and we don't meet next month, so we just really have January and February to kind of finalize candidates.
And the new officers take office at the
that
end
meeting.
of the April meeting.
Yeah, after the election in April. So any questions right now? Okay. Well, again,
You scared 'em.
come talk to us in private if you don't want to make it known publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. And I want to apologize that Vicki told me that they wanted time to come up and do this, but I thought it was at the board meeting, which was 2 days ago. So none of them were able to come to the board meeting, so didn't get it straight. So, all right, show and tell. First, those of you who have things, go ahead and come up and kind of in the line. The first one is Mike Perry.
So one of the members from my church wanted to know if I would make a cross to hold the, I'm trying to think what it's called now, Samaritan's Purse children's box. These are boxes they're shoe boxes that go around the world. So she wanted me to make a cross for that. The next slide shows you when you take the boxes out. The left one shows you, it's hollow, and then I also made it where it comes apart and it fits into the other one. So it makes it easier to store. So that's just a little thing. And then I've got the next one is Journey to Bethlehem. This is I'm inviting people to the Journey to Bethlehem in Troy, Missouri. Next slide, please. It's free admission, and the reason I'm bringing that up is, does anybody know what this could be? Me takers. Okay. Somebody else from my church asked me if I would make some oil lanterns. Well, of course, we don't want people walking around through the Journey of Bethlehem with carrying oil and with a live flame. So I made these with an LED light in. So with a CNC, and that's what it's supposed to look like. However, it was a little easier just to make it like this. So, and then I also made it where it comes apart because there's a battery in there, so we got to be able to change that battery out. And they just snap apart instead of having to use any hardware. It all comes apart to service. So that was all created on the CNC. So, any questions? All right. Thank you.
I decided I wanted to play around and make some geometric cutting boards. So this one takes 3 glue ups. It's a fascinating process. The trick is to keep everything totally square. This one was actually harder to glue up because this is done with strips. These are done with individual pieces. So.
That's not mine, so. It just says raffle. So, Joe, we're ready for the raffle. So we usually have somebody who has not entered the raffle to pick things. I think one of them fell out there, yeah. Steve, or Bob. You look at those tickets there. Those are mine.
Last 3 digits. 2, 5, 7. There? I can't get it right on top. What do you want, Jay?
A saw blade.
Reminder, we have 2 saws, 1 saw blade, 2 $50 Rockler gift cards, and 3 festival hats. So, you want to draw? My concern is you still have tickets and you have a wallet here.
If I do, they will be passed on to somebody else.
Last 3 digits, 4, 0, 1.
Thank you.
What would you like, Mr. Taylor? Here you go, baby. You'd like a $50 gift card. And Three, one. Two, eight. We have a winner. All right. Well, yes. That's all we got. Is that the one you want? All right. The one that won it up. 284.
Wow.
Probably a little late for you, but. 392.
Okay, I'd like to point out that in the past, forever that I am aware of, we have actually purchased ourselves from Rockler one of the $50 gift certificates. This is the first time and another example of our sponsorship program starting to pay off. Their sponsorship isn't finalized yet, but right away, the manager of the Rockler store, when we talked to them, said, I'm going to hand you two $50 gift certificates to start with, as you know, and he's planning on that for the rest of the time. That's a fair amount of money over the course of a year that we don't have to, and we shouldn't have had to be paying for gift certificates for a business that they weren't doing anything in return, and they got business for it. All right, thank you very much. So, November presentation, WD Quinn Saw Company. Joe Zickel is going to be speaking, and Bill is his partner. I have to admit that I didn't even know about them, and I've been here for 38 years in the area in O'Fallon, Illinois, until maybe 8 years ago or something like that. But boy, I wish I had, because I've had, where the heck can I get these saw blades? And I have a lot of saw blades. But since then, I bet I've taken 8, 10 blades to them, and our shop always gets our saw blades from the shop sharpened there too. They're unbelievable people. It's so nice, and to talk. They just stop everything and talk to you too. We have a video that was done on a tour that we did not too long ago. So they've been a very good friend of our guild. So I am very proud to have them speak tonight, and so it's all yours.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks again for the opportunity. This is really nice. First off, saw blades. First thing we want to talk about is always safety with a moving tool. Just basic saw safety things, just want to review things with everyone as far as making sure the machine is off before you touch the spinning saw blade. Just basics. Just want to go over that real quick. But there's nothing more important than just being safe around power tools and when they're running. So I'm Joe Zickel. My brother Bill Zickel and I own Quinn Saw Company that's been in our family for generations. I get excited about saw blades and the opportunity to talk about saw blades. Because if you look here, this is the 1860 census. I know my brother Bill researched this for me. Going back to New York State. And if you see right here, John Quinn, that's my great-great-grandfather. And he's a saw maker. So going back, 150 years through my great-great-grandfather, John Quinn, his son, who's W.D. Quinn, who's our namesake, my grandmother, my dad, now my brother and I, and then our next generation, Bill's son, Dan. It's just awe-inspiring to be part of that opportunity to continue the legacy of saw blades and Quinn Saw. So it's just mind-bending what John Quinn and W.D. Quinn, our ancestors, did throughout history to put us in the place where we are now. And my dad always said, boy, if W.D. Quinn came and looked in the window, he'd ask, what do you do here now? It doesn't look like you sharpen saw blades. Because, back in his day, he was using a hand file and a grinding wheel. And nowadays, it's all, computer controlled. So just a little history, going back to the 1860s when my great-great-grandfather worked at a saw factory in New York, made his way to the St. Louis area, working for a company that made saw blades down on the riverfront. Going back to the next generation of W.D. Quinn, who also worked at a saw factory as a sawsmith, straightening saw blades. And then through my grandmother and my dad, also learned the art of saw smithing. And now my brother and I. So just a quick history of Quinn Saw leads us into kind of the history of saw blades. So hundreds of years ago, the most basic process of taking a tree and converting it into something that you want to build with, you have to chop it down or saw it down and then make that into logs, into cants. And many ways they would do that would just be with a two-handed saw. And a man would be in the bottom of a pit, and his partner would be at the top of a pit with a toothed blade, and they would have to pull it up and down and push that through the log. Very inefficient, but at the time, that's what they had to deal with. As things go, people developed improvements on that frame saw technique, and they have other ones that keep the tension. That was the problem with two people doing that sawing motion. It was difficult to keep the tension in the saw blade. So they developed apparatuses that would keep it in tension, but how do you cut a large thing with one person? It, again, needed more improvements. So then we get into the circular saw. This just kind of goes through more of the mechanical parts of going from manual operation to more mechanical movement of the saws to cut through the material, and utilizing things like water or wind that would mechanically move those saw blades. Then in the 1700s, the invention of the circular saw blade, where instead of a straight line of teeth, it had teeth around the circumference of the blade, and they could attach that to the beginning was something like a treadle. I think it's, if you figure when they're spinning yarn, they have a foot pedal that then turns something into circular motion. Same thing they would do with the circular disc with teeth on it. And then improving on that would be mechanical circular motion. So getting the machines, getting the blades, all improving over time through the 1700s, brings us to how do we make the saw blade improved. The first saw blades were just circular discs that had teeth stamped. The teeth would be pushed left and right, which is called set, and that would provide the clearance of the saw blade as it cuts through the part. Further improvements would be swedging, which is similar to that, where it would spread the teeth to provide clearance to the teeth. Most of the saw blades were made in the Sheffield, England area because they were at the forefront of steel making. So I guess providing a piece of steel that has the tension that's necessary to stay straight as it's spinning was their expertise. Throughout the 1800s then, companies like the Diston Company brings that same technology to the United States. And then further improvements of the saw blades then go through, let's see, things like hollow grinding of the blade. So they're actually grinding now the sides of the blades to provide that clearance instead of bending the teeth left and right. In the woodworking industry, other inventions like this inserted tooth design that is used widely still today in mill saws utilizes a shank and a bit that are locked into the tooth, and those teeth can be removed and resharpened at the sawmill. After that improvement, then we look at the invention or the implementation of tungsten carbide in the 1900s that are then brazed onto the teeth, again, to extend the life of the blade and allowed it to cut longer and faster. Getting into even more exotic tips, nowadays we see polycrystalline diamond that's also brazed to the teeth that allow it to extend the life even more beyond just a carbide tip. Any questions so far? All right, now that we have some history, let's get into some technical information so that everyone kind of knows about what are different terms that are used with saw blades. We use different terms on a daily basis. First off would be the diameter of the saw blade. Fairly simple. Then you get into the bore size. We have hundreds of different bushings that we use in our shop because there are so many different saw blades, different manufacturers that have specialized bores, and they have pinholes that might be added, but it's specific to certain applications. But just knowing the terminology. So you've got your diameter and bore, and then your number of teeth. Those are the main critical factors. Your gullet is the space where your chip goes when you're cutting, and that it expels the chip as it's in the cut. Let's see, the carbide tip. Expansion slots, that's the ES. Those are typically laser cut into the saw blade, and that allows for the expansion of the blade as it's spinning at speed. Actually, the steel wants to seek the rim of the blade. And if those expansion slots were not there, the blade would then tend to wobble or wiggle. So those expansion slots are kind of a controlled crack that allows the blade to stay stable as it's spinning up to speed. Different things like the radial and tangential angles. Those are the grinding angles that are ground into the teeth to provide clearance of the tooth to the body of the saw blade. There's some kind of extra things like wiper slots that are specialized in certain sawmill applications, but the majority of the time, as long as you know diameter, bore, and your number of teeth, things like kerf also are dependent upon your plate thickness. So any questions on saw blades? It's actually just to stop that crack from continuing on through the blade. Sometimes it will also help with noise. If you have just an open spot, that can give harmonics that would tend to make noise, so they fill that with copper material. Nowadays, most blades just have like a laser curly Q or something else that would end the laser slot. All right, so more technical information about saw blades includes the hook angle. The hook angle is how the blade is either, the tooth is either canted forward or backward. So when do you use certain saw blades? So typically the hook angle for the positive is when you're sawing below, like your saw blade is below the table of your material. It's more aggressive, and that's why when the saw blade is above the material, like a radial arm saw, using a negative hook angle will keep the blade from feeding itself, because it would have a tendency to want to climb when the blade is above the material. All right, so we're talking about here is the plate thickness, which is the body of the saw blade, and then your kerf determines how wide of a cut that you're making. Usually the kerf is a few thousandths wider than the saw body to allow that cutting motion through the material and so that the blade body does not bind. Again, I think we talked about the expansion slots and gullet. So now that we know some of the technical terms of a saw blade, how is it made? So they'll start out with a large sheet of plate material. CNC lasers will cut out that shape. They'll take that heat-treated body, they'll do straightening processes, they'll do tensioning to the blade, and then they will braze the carbide tips onto the periphery of the made plate. There are different grades of carbide that can be used for different applications. On wood cutting applications, you can use a harder grade of carbide, which then gives you longer blade life. On certain metal cutting applications, you want something that's more impact resistant. So there are thousands of different combinations of, and carbide is typically, it's a combination of tungsten and a cobalt binder. And it's that mixture of the tungsten pieces and the cobalt that determine if it's harder or if it's more wear resistant or shock resistant. The brazing of the carbide tips is also an important process. The type of process that we use is using what's called a tri-metal shim. It's actually a real thin sandwich of silver, copper, and silver that is then melted at a certain temperature. That melts and that brazes the carbide tip to the steel body. Then it becomes one unit. After that tip is made, then the blade is ground with different geometries based on what the blade is designed to being used for. All right, so what are we going to do with the saw blade now that we have it made? So for woodworking, cutting is usually comes in two forms. Is either you're ripping, which is going with the grain of the wood, or you're cross-cutting through the grain of the wood. And those two types of sawing applications utilize different tooth geometries. With the ripping, you're chiseling through that wood. So you can use a flat top or triple chip type tooth geometry, and that's the majority of rip type saw blades use that type of geometry with a higher hook angle. There's also glue line type rip blades that have different geometries that provide for a smoother finish on the material. A standard rip blade would have a fairly high radial angle and clearance angles, which allow you to cut faster. However, the finish would not be as good as something like a glue line rip that has more upright side clearances that will give you a nicer finish. When we're looking at cross-cutting, you're wanting to sever those wood fibers, kind of like cutting through a stalk of celery. So in order to do that, you need a very sharp point. And that type of blade typically would have an alternate top bevel geometry where the teeth alternate left and right, and they're pointed to cut through that wood fiber. Also, the cross-cutting blade would have a higher tooth count. You can see here there are hundreds of different tooth geometries. These are just a few that Dan pulled out, that we have different programs for all of these tooth geometries based on materials that our customers are cutting. We might have customers who are cutting plastic that will use a certain geometry that would differ than another customer who's cutting a steel bar. And all these different shapes are things that people have developed over the years to help improve the sawing process. Same thing with the material that the grades of carbide that continually are improved. So how many teeth do you need in your saw blade? Good rule of thumb is, and I think it's generally known as, the less teeth, the faster you'll be able to cut, because you have more space for the material to get pushed out of the cut, and it would then though provide not as good of a surface finish. When you go with a blade with more teeth, then you may have a nicer surface finish, but you might not be able to push through the material as quickly. Different types of saw blades are made by different manufacturers. You go to the Home Depot store or Lowe's, and you see a gamut of 20, 30, inexpensive blades. You order something online or come to Quinn Saw or get a nicer industrial type saw blade, might be 2 or 3 times more expensive. Why is that? It's because the, big box type store blades are typically stamped out of steel, whereas an industrial type blade is laser cut. The basic blades may have a real small carbide tip, which just allows you to sharpen it maybe a few times, whereas an industrial type saw blade has a large tip that could be ground 8, 10, 20 times. So it's kind of the get what you pay for is also applicable in saw blades. All right, so a lot of the questions that we get at the shop are, how do I know when to send my saw blade in for sharpening? Sometimes you wonder why, you look at the condition of the saw blade, and I brought one in today here, and you wonder why hadn't they taken it out a couple of years before? If we look at, I think there's some examples of dullness in the saw blade, you'll see a rounding over of the cutting edge. Right here you can just see a little bit of a rounding over there, and right here is the sign that your saw blade is getting dull, and what you'll find is it's harder to push your material through the blade because there's more resistance to the cut. You'll also get buildup on the side of the teeth. When you have that buildup, it reduces that clearance that we talked about earlier, and instead of cutting freely through the material, you're rubbing with that buildup on the side of the blades. Sometimes a customer will bring a saw blade in and he says, I think my blade needs to be sharpened. We'll put it in our ultrasonic cleaner, take a look at it, and give it back to him and say, you don't need to sharpen this saw blade, you just need to keep it clean. So if there's one thing that's important is keeping your tools clean will help extend that blade life. Let's see. So going back also with dullness, these are kind of some good drawings of the cutting edge, say on the side. As that tip is worn away, we need to restore a sharp cutting edge to that blade. And what we do is, you can see where this dotted line here is, we'll grind away both the front and the top of the tooth so that we equally remove the dullness from that rounded edge. Let's see. Here's another example of a saw blade with a rounding over of that front cutting edge there. Or you can see chipping way at the top. Just typical examples of what we see on a daily basis of what saw blades are put through, and we'll restore them to a nice sharp cutting edge so that they perform much better. Again, things like chips or broken teeth, we can replace those. We'll heat that tooth up, remove the broken tip, rebraze in a new carbide tip, grind the sides to match the kerf of the existing teeth, and then resharpen the tooth so it matches all the existing teeth. We kind of talked about the sharpening process. It starts off with that ultrasonic cleaning that we do to get all that pitch buildup. We check it for all those tips, make sure there's no tip damage. They get segregated off if we need to replace tips. If not, then it will go through a check of straightness. If there's any dish in the blade, we can straighten straighten that blade with a smithing process or a, what's the roll tensioning machine, thanks. And then after it's gone through those checks, then it's resharpened on one of our CNC grinding machines. We'll pull up the different programs for the tooth geometry of that blade, and the machine regrinds it. It removes that dullness, and then we've got a nice sharp saw blade for our customer. This is kind of a good picture of how a blade is, or a tip when it's brand new, is sharpened on the front and the top, how that gets smaller and smaller. And what that does is also reduces that clearance of the sides of the saw blade, which can also make the blade act dull because the tip is smaller and you've lost that clearance between the tip and the body. So it might be tougher for it to go through the material. So as the blade gets along in its life and the tips get smaller, just be aware that the blade life will also be diminished. Let's see. Yeah, how long will my blade last? We get that question a lot. I wish I could tell you. We've got customers that have sent in the same saw blade that they bought 20 years ago. We might only see them every 5 years, but they just use it infrequently. We have other customers that send in 20 saw blades every other day for sharpening because they're manufacturing a high volume of metal sawn parts. So we run the whole gamut, but as far as how long my blades last, we can't tell you the exact number, but just be assured that it will be the optimum amount after we sharpen the blades. Let's see, how many times can my blade be sharpened? That goes back to the size of the tip that's on your saw blade. When you have a nice large carbide tip, it can be sharpened 10, 20 times, depending upon how dull the blade gets. If you've got a lot of dullness on your saw blade, we have to grind more off the tip, so that reduces the blade life and the number of resharpenings. If it's lightly dull, we can just do a light grind on the blade, restore it to a nice sharpening cutting edge, then you'll have maximum blade life. All right. Kind of starting to wrap up. I know the saw blades can be very technical if you want it to be. There are certain parameters as far as the chip load per tooth that can be calculated. So based on the speed of your saw blade, the number of teeth that are being rotated per revolution, and how fast you're pushing it through, all calculate out to how much of a bite each tooth is taking. So to optimize your sawing, and this is more in high production environments, we can use these types of charts or calculators to give us a better idea on how fast should they be pushing that material through the saw blade. And by optimizing that, sometimes it helps the blade to last longer if you're pushing it faster because you're not generating heat. So things like that that help to optimize your saw can just help prolong your blade life. And then finally, I think one thing we need to talk about too is just your saw maintenance, making sure that your machine is up to par on all these tolerances that you want to make sure that are then translated to the saw blade. So things like your flanges, checking your spindle, making sure your fence is parallel, just basic saw machine maintenance also plays a role in how well your blade performs. Let's see. Make sure I can. I think that covers most of my presentation. Just want to make sure, did anybody have any questions on any of the topics that I brought up?
Question, yeah, when I get grime on the side of my teeth, is that an indication that it's starting to get dull, or is it an indication that my wood is just sappy, or et cetera?
It could be both. I would think if your blade is a fairly new blade that has a lot of clearance built into it, the amount of buildup would be less than as your blade is towards the end of its life. You'll see that happen more often. But a lot of it depends on the material that you're sawing and how, as you said, how adherent it is to the sides of the blade.
I had 3 questions for you. I'll try to take it down to just a couple here. When you purchase new machinery, how do you figure out the new technology? Do you go to conventions for this, or how do you figure out, you know?
By far, the epicenter of saw grinding machinery. Are you asking for us on our grinding machines?
Yeah.
It's in Germany. The major player is a company called Vollmer, and over the years they've just developed more and more technology to make the machines smarter. They have castings that make it stronger, where it's more rigid. They also have robotics that we utilize in our shop that we can stack blades, maybe 50 to a cart, and that loads and unloads while we're not even, we're sharpening blades right now and nobody's at the shop. But yeah, going to tool shows that are focused on the woodworking area, typically in Germany, maybe every couple of years we'll go and see what the latest technology is what we do just to make sure we're up on the latest machinery.
I know that you were showing, it was either you or Bill was showing me, you were sharpening and you were actually looking on your phone and it showed all if a machine was working properly or not. I think that technology was really cool.
Yeah, we have some machines that will actually call us up and it has a message, machine number 5, error. And what we can do, we have cameras throughout our shop and we can log in from our phone at home and we can visualize, do we need to go out and correct the error? Is it something that's critical, or is that machine just about finished for the day? So yeah, using just basic technology helps make things more efficient. Yeah, it's really cool what they do nowadays on technology.
I think there's several other questions back there, but could you, before you're done, tell us a little bit about the blades that you have on display here?
Sure.
You don't have to do it now, but
No, well, I'll go through. I just brought just a smattering of different, diameters, numbers of teeth, just a visual representation of all the different bore sizes, pinholes, different applications like this blade here. This blade is specifically for a company in St. Louis that they're cutting it's like an insulating sandwich material that's very dense. So they need to utilize a certain kerf on that saw blade for their application. The blade here with the large center bore, That's used on a panel saw, which utilizes a scoring blade in conjunction with the main blade, and it's usually for panel processing, like a double-sided laminate. So maybe a closet company that will be taking big sheets of laminated material. The bottom scoring blade will just pierce the bottom of that board, just enough so that it cuts through that laminate. And then this main blade cuts through the top into that slot that the scoring blade already made. And the reason why it does that is when you have the laminated materials, if there was just one saw blade cutting, it pushes down on that top laminate because the teeth are pushing through the material and cutting in a downward motion. But on the back side, or the bottom of the material, with that thin laminate, there might be a tendency for that thin material to chip off and cause chipping. So the scoring blade is just a few tenths of a millimeter wider, and it cuts that trough and it cuts that laminate, again, pushing it up into the material so that there's not chipping, and then allows that, I guess I could have brought a picture of that, but that's what this application is. Other ones are just for like a large chop saw. We have a Freud combination blade that's used on a standard table saw, and then our Festool blades. I will do a announcement also regarding the Festool brand, is that we are now a special Festool dealer, and it's because they have chosen us to be their nationwide sharpening center. So, yeah, they wanted to implement a service for all of their Festool customers to be able to recycle their saw blades instead of throwing blades away or just buying brand new blades. How more sustainable can you get than to sharpen your existing blade? So it's a German company that, again, is very big on sustainability. And so they partnered with us, and now they're starting to branch out regionally. And then I think by the start of the 2024, it will be a national offering that they'll offer this sharpening process through Quinn Saw. So we're excited about that. And in that same vein, they allowed us to be a Festool saw blade dealer. So if anyone's using Festool blades, you can now get your saw blades from Quinn Saw. I think the question was, can we just drop off saw blades?
At your location, and what's the turnaround time?
Correct. Yeah, we're at the shop Monday through Friday, 6:30 till 4, and we have customers drop off blades all the time. Turnaround time is a week. So if you drop your blades off on Monday, they'll be done by the next Monday or even sooner. Take Visa, MasterCard, American Express, or we can set up customers with accounts, and all guild members get 10% off the sharpening. So just make sure you tell us when you drop your blades off that you're a member of the Woodworkers Guild, and you get 10% off your sharpening pricing.
You take a typical blade, like say a Forest Woodworker 2.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you put that blade in the quality scheme of things, and typically what would it cost to sharpen a blade with like that?
Yeah, the Forest blades, I cannot fault them. They make a very high quality saw blade. They are built to very high tolerances. The only thing I can fault them for is their excessive price. They really ask a lot for their saw blades, We make a blade that's very similar to, say, the Woodworker 2, and it's a lot less expensive than the Forest name brand. We don't have the marketing or the outreach that Forest does, so we can pass on that savings to customers. But yeah, that actually, those blades that we gave away is very similar to that type of blade. But yeah, for us, we see every brand of saw blade come through for sharpening. The super high quality, and I would put Forest in that upper echelon, down to really cheap Chinese blades that came originally as original equipment on a saw that they just needed a saw to throw on. So there's definitely differences between the tolerances of the plate body, the thicknesses, the grade of carbide, all those things come into play. But yeah, I would put the Forest as a high quality. But as far as sharpening cost, it's the same as any other blade. It's based on the number of teeth. I think our base price for a 40-tooth blade is $15 to sharpen. And then a 80-tooth blade is $25 to sharpen it. And then we can replace the tips. If the tips are broken, they're $5 for a tip replacement. So it's very, very reasonable, especially when you compare it to some of the costs of new blades. And one thing that I'm always impressed with our operators in the back of the shop that do the inspection and that check the blades is they know the difference between a $20 saw blade and a $200 saw blade. So they're not going to put 10 tips in a $20 saw blade, but definitely putting 2 or 3 tips in a $200 saw blade is worthwhile. So they're really good about recommending, hey, this blade, it's not worth repairing. We'll either contact the customer or say, hey, here's a replacement cost. We'd rather you spend that $30 on a brand new blade than putting it towards something that's not worthwhile.
One other question. I bought one of those a long time ago, and they included a stabilizer. What's your thoughts about using stabilizers?
It's customer preference. Sometimes it's applicable if you're using a thin kerf saw blade and you need that stability, but it allows you with a limited range to still utilize that thin kerf. Other applications, if you're using a standard kerf saw blade that has a standard plate thickness, not typically necessary. It can't hurt other than reducing the capacity of your cut.
A quick comment to make. You mentioned the 10% off if you're a member. A lot of our sponsors who support that have an expectation that you have your membership card with you. So please remember to do that, and then you won't have a problem. Here you go, Dan.
Yeah, I was wondering, the question is to you, but really to the whole guild. Does anybody have a favorite cleaner to get the pitch off of blades? I've used carburetor cleaner and maybe acetone. I don't know. What does it say again?
Well, what? Oh,
Simple
yeah.
green. Simple green.
Mm-hmm.
Simple green?
Simple green.
Couple questions.
Oh,
Couple.
well, let me get back as far as cleaning. I'll give you some tips. What we utilize, I think some of you guys have seen it in operation, is a big ultrasonic cleaning tank that it will clean that super pitched blade up in just seconds. For home use, you can Google or Amazon. There's saw blade cleaning kits for $20 or $30 that have a solution and a little tank that you can do. We've heard, people use simple green oven, simple green. I've heard easy off oven cleaner does the trick sometimes. Just leaving your blade in a warm, soapy solution overnight and coming back and using like a soft bristle brush can also just soften that wood pitch that's built up on the sides of the blade. And as long as you get that off with a nice bristle brush, what you want to avoid is using, say, a wire brush that will also impart more dullness to the cutting edge. So yeah, just those are great ideas. Yeah, simple green is one I've heard many times over. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's stuff where there is a chemical reaction to that cobalt binder in the carbide. That is one part of dullness that I guess we didn't really talk about. Is not only is the abrasive properties of cutting and the physical interaction between the tooth and the material, but also the chemical reaction of the wood pitch can break down that cutting edge of a saw tip. So yeah, that's a good topic to bring up too on carbide.
Two other questions. Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yep.
there it is. Two other questions. Do you sharpen high-speed steel blades?
Well, there's when you say high-speed steel, there's real high-speed steel, which is a metal cutting type saw blade that is used for what's called cold sawing. That's for metal sawing. But for wood cutting, there's what we call solid metal or solid tooth blades, which are the old style before carbide was so prevalent. Those type, we do not. I've, in my early teens and 20s, that was my job at the shop, was to sharpen all of we call them the wood blades, the solid tooth wood blades. And I'd be there at a grinding wheel, gulleting out the teeth. I'd have to set the teeth to make sure that there's clearance on it. I would have to hand file it. Nowadays, to pay someone to do it correctly, you'd have to pay them. We'd have to charge $100 for a $6 saw blade to do it correctly.
I'll send those back to Craftsman. The other question is, if I have a combination blade, it's carbide tipped, with alternate top bevel, can you change that to a flat top bevel?
Yeah, the drawback is when you have those teeth that are angled, we have to grind off probably half of the tip to make that a nice flat cutting edge, which will then not allow you to sharpen the blade as many times. So to go from an alternate top to a flat, you're looking at just taking half of your life out of your saw blade.
Joe, will you mention that you happen to make a flat top drum?
Correct. Yeah, we do have in our Dan's our production manager. We do have we call it our box joint blade, and it's just for flat sawing where you want to make a nice flat bottom cut. So instead of not ruining, but just using up an alternate top bevel blade to make that, sometimes people will have specific blades for specific applications. But if it's an old blade that you don't use anyway, we certainly can grind that to a flat top.
Can you do a dado set?
Certainly. Yeah, the dado sets, the key with dado sets is make sure you bring in all of the inside cutters, because when our guys do those, they match them so that they provide a perfectly flat cut. We just had a customer that sent in, he actually brought in a sample, and you could see it was kind of like a buck tooth, that there was a nice flat, and then there was a divot because he forgot to send in one of his cutters, and it was cutting a groove in his dado, and it didn't work too well for him. But yeah, certainly.
Sharpen router bits.
We do not do them in-house. We actually have a gentleman that picks those up from us on Fridays, and it's about a week turnaround for the router bit sharpening. We don't do those in-house, but we do offer it as ancillary service along with the like planer knives. Same thing. We've got a partner that strictly does knife work, and we share business with them, and they'll do the same thing. Well, they'll do our knives for us and do it on a weekly turnaround. So yeah, definitely we can take care of any of the sharpening needs on that.
So I have a question running from cutting aluminum, like picture frames, back into wood. What's my risk other than I know that the aluminum might be harder?
Well, typically on those two different materials, you'd use a different tooth geometry. We deal a lot in the picture frame industry, and we have two separate blades that we make that might have the same exact diameter, same exact number of teeth, but the tooth geometry for the aluminum would be a triple chip tooth shape, whereas your wood cutting would be an alternate top tooth geometry. With aluminum, there's not a grain to it. So the triple chip tooth shape gives it a little bit of a stronger cutting edge so that the blade lasts longer. Whereas if you have an alternate top bevel, which is more appropriate for your wood cutting because you're cutting those wood fibers, it would degrade that sharp point if you were to cut aluminum with that. You know, aluminum is forgiving. It's a non-ferrous metal, so it's not like you're cutting a bar of steel, but still it would be recommended to utilize the correct geometry for the material that you're sawing. Do you know what tooth shape is on your blades now? Yeah, come on by, we'll help you out with that.
I imagine you check the clearance in the blade around it to make sure that there's enough to sharpen it before you go ahead and actually do it.
The industry standard that we follow is when that tip thickness reaches 1 millimeter. At that point, you know that the clearance is pretty much gone between the tip kerf and the blade body. So when the blade tip thickness reaches that 1 millimeter point, then that's when we recommend replacing it with a new blade. Any okay. Hey, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and you guys are great.
What's your location?
We actually just moved to a new facility about 1.5 years ago. We're about 5 minutes from the airport in St. Anne. If you just Google Quinn Saw, that's the best way because we're kind of back behind off the St. Charles Rock Road, near Lindbergh and the Rock Road. Yeah, we're right behind the St. Anne post office, and there's a St. Anne golf course that's right next to us. But yeah, I do have cards up here at the front if you need that. Also, if you want any of the information that we presented tonight, as far as some of those technical charts, we could email that to you if it's something of interest. But thank you very much for the opportunity to help out, and enjoy your night. Thanks so much.
Besides everything else, when you get a blade sharpened, you get your name engraved into the blade that's coming back to you.